I recently made a video about 1 million moms, partly because I was troubled by the fact that so few people seem to understand that it's really just one angry Christian mom. And then I realized, wait a minute, that's not the only group that pretends to be larger than it really is, because there's also a group called the Catholic League. And they're not really a league of anything. Publicly, anyway, it's really just one old, angry Catholic dude. Even behind the scenes, it's just one old, angry Catholic dude surrounded by a small, mostly invisible staff. So let's talk about this group, by which I really mean him. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, better known as the Catholic League, and even better known as the dude who always defends the Catholic Church even when you really don't have to, was founded in 1973, not long after the Roe v. Wade decision, as a way to push back against anti-Catholic bias. Now, in theory, that's not a bad thing. I don't like bias. When atheists are under attack, there are a few groups that offer rebuttals using the weight of their membership, and I find that to be really useful and important. Same with groups that respond to attacks on LGBTQ people. Same with the Anti-Defamation League, which pushes back against anti-Semitism. It's nice to have voices of authority pushing back against gross generalizations made against their communities. But it's a little weird when a Catholic group says we're here to defend the church, because Catholics are usually not victims of anything. Children of Catholics? Maybe. But not the priests, not the church, not the religion itself. Saying they're persecuted is like Wall Street bankers creating a special club just to speak out in defense of rich white guys. Like, I'm pretty sure you'll be okay no matter what. And whatever criticism you're getting is probably legitimate. Even with the recent Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, Republicans kept saying Democrats are attacking her Catholic faith, when literally no one cared about her private beliefs and were only concerned about how she would arrive at her legal decisions. It's hard to be one of the most dominant religions in the world, certainly one of the most popular religions in the United States, with churches and schools and hospitals all over the place, and with all the politicians and the majority of the Supreme Court, with the wealth of the Vatican, and still pretend everyone is out to get you. I mean, if you're gonna do that, first, you better have some really good examples of it. This group does not. More on that later. And second, if you're victims, that means other people have it better than you. And I would love to know which religious group they would like to trade places with. Since the Catholic League frequently attacks the religion of secularism, do they think atheists have it better? Tell you what, you give me a small percentage of Vatican money, and I will give you my greatest resource as an atheist. My Wi-Fi password. Anyway, the Catholic League was founded by a guy named Reverend Virgil Blum, who died in 1990. He was one of these guys who strongly believed that taxpayer money should fund Catholic schools, which is a horrible idea. So his idea of persecution was quite literally church-state separation. After he retired, just before his death in 1989, the Catholic League had a handful of different presidents for a few years, but no one who really stood out in the job. The group's membership grew smaller and smaller. They weren't leaving much of a footprint anywhere. And again, that's not surprising, because Catholic persecution isn't a real issue. Not now, and certainly not in the United States. At least not the way they have always defined it. Then, in 1993, 3 years after Reverend Virgil Blum died, the Catholic League got a new president, a sociology professor named William Donohue, who had previously been working with the right-wing Heritage Foundation, where his specialty was condemning the ACLU. Because a guy who dedicates his career to fighting groups that defend civil liberties is exactly who you want defending civil liberties. At the time, the Catholic League had about 11,000 members. 6 years later, in 1999, according to the New York Times, they had 350,000 members. But the article said that's a number Donohue basically pulled out of nowhere using his own formula. And then in 2009, a decade later, he told the New York Times his group had 50,000 paying members. And now, a decade later, they don't release membership information at all. Who knows what's true, or who counts, or where all those supporters went? Two things seem to be true here. They grew, and they don't want to say how much they grew by. I can think of a simple explanation for that. If you don't say how many people you represent, other people may assume the number is a lot bigger than it actually is. But if it grew at all, it means something changed. So what changed? Basically, Donohue began going after anything and everything that mentioned Catholicism, even in innocuous ways, as being against Catholicism. This was especially true when it was mentioned in popular culture, TV shows, music, movies, because he knew everyone else would pay attention. People may not care about legal discrimination, but they will care if a famous person allegedly pokes fun at religion. For example, his first big success was going after this ad for VH1 on the sides of buses in New York City. Seriously, VH1! It shows the singer Madonna next to the biblical Madonna with the words, "The difference between you and your parents." Is that offensive? No. Objectively, no. It's saying your parents are probably traditional and religious, but you're younger and hipper and into Madonna, like all the cool kids. But Donohue's argument was that the signs violated church-state separation, which is silly because that ad just uses a well-known mythological figure, and it's not a promotion of anything other than, hey everyone, it's 1993. Donohue also called it a form of blasphemy, because he's not a smart man. Now, the correct response would have been to laugh at Donohue. He deserves it. He always deserves it. Instead, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, which oversees public transportation in New York City, pulled the ads down entirely. Donohue won. After that round of publicity, he just kept insisting everything was anti-Catholic. While groups like the ACLU care about legal violations of religious rights, Donohue cared only about perception, which is like the ACLU fighting decapitation while Donohue makes a bigger deal over paper cuts. Let me give you a rundown of some of his more infamous campaigns. The Academy Awards gave its Best Picture Oscar to Spotlight. Donohue argued it's because Hollywood hates Catholics, not because it was just a really good movie. Presidential candidate John Edwards in 2007 hired feminist bloggers who had criticized the church's stance against abortion and birth control. Donohue implied Edwards somehow hated Catholics too, even though in 2004 he had been the running mate for John Kerry, a Catholic. A Saturday Night Live joke compared modern-day support for the Catholic Church to still being a fan of R. Kelly after finding out about his tapes. Pete Davidson and SNL and NBC and Comcast all hate Catholics. Here's the kicker. A full-bodied, anatomically correct milk chocolate statue of Jesus unveiled on Easter at a New York City art gallery? That's one of the worst assaults on Christian sensibilities ever. I'm not kidding. That's what he really said. Imagine how good you have to have it for the existence of a chocolate statue to be among the greatest acts of persecution against people of your faith. Sure, Jews had the Holocaust, but Catholics had to deal with cocoa. Donohue also has this habit of lashing out at the world when the wise thing to do is nothing. When staffers at the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo were murdered for depicting the Islamic prophet in cartoon form, Donohue spoke out and blamed the staffers for bringing the attack upon themselves. It was like a theological version of, well, what was she wearing? He said of the magazine's publisher, "It's too bad that he didn't understand the role he played in his tragic death. Had he not been so narcissistic, he may still be alive." Leave it to a Catholic to blame the victims. This is a running theme for him, by the way. You'll see. Donohue has also gone after atheists, all of whom, in his mind, are militant. He once said this in an interview talking about non-religious people.
They don't want to be told anything, which is why they die prematurely. They're unhappy. That's why we have a disproportionate number of agnostics and atheists in the asylum. All of this is true.
None of that is true. He is misinterpreting a number of studies because, again, he's very stupid. He also said, and I'm not making this up, that Christians own December. Like, all of it. Even December 1st. He added that it's just like how black people own February, which, by the way, they don't. Someone should really tell atheist Herman Meta about that. That guy just doesn't seem to get it. You get the picture, though, right? These knee-jerk responses by a professional jerk has been their shtick for decades now. Donohue only seems to speak via angry press releases with the caps lock key permanently pushed down. He's like a guy who went as Donald Trump's Twitter account for Halloween and forgot how to unzip the costume. We're talking about a guy who once said the Catholic Church declaring Galileo a heretic doesn't really matter because he was under house arrest at the end of his life, not in a dungeon. And that the Crusades can be justified as a reasonable response to Islamic jihad, and that even the Inquisition can be rationalized. He's a guy who nearly had an aneurysm after Notre Dame University gave an honorary degree to President Obama because how dare a Catholic school honor a president, the first black president, even though he doesn't force women to give birth against their will. You know, even the Pope will sometimes say the church needs to change. But Bill Donohue believes the church must always stay the same because there was never anything wrong with it. And don't you say otherwise. It's you who needs to adjust. Speaking of the Pope, Donohue is not a fan of Pope Francis because this Pope isn't as conservative as he wants him to be. When the Pope said climate change was a real problem, Donohue basically called him a socialist sympathizer. This guy is a wannabe Sean Hannity wearing the disguise of a concerned Catholic. As one article about him said, his main constituency appears to be TV bookers, not the Catholics who go to church. But that's what he does. He overreacts to everything, waits for the media to cover the outrage, which gives him the opportunity to say more outrageous things, and the cycle just keeps repeating like that. The world is not becoming more anti-Catholic. It's just that the bar for what the Catholic League considers anti-Catholic keeps getting lower and lower. Donohue is also a bully and a bigot himself. He once said on TV that, quote, Hollywood is controlled by secular Jews who hate Christianity in general and Catholicism in particular, unquote. Which is ignorant and bigoted and anti-Semitic all at once. In 2005, he said, quote, "The gay community has yet to apologize to straight people for all the damage that they have done, for contaminating the blood supply in New York City and around the country," unquote. They didn't do that. It takes a lot of hubris to say gay people owe straight people an apology for anything. Maybe the biggest reason for the Catholic League's notoriety is that it's really the only group willing to stand up for the church no matter what we find out about its priests, even when they're credibly accused of child sex abuse. In general, Donohue's response always boils down to this: it happened a long time ago and not as much anymore, so why is everyone making a big deal about it? Because it still happens. When some states allowed lawsuits for victims of sexual abuse to proceed, even if the incidents occurred so long ago that they were previously deemed outside the statute of limitations, Donohue said the real effect of those laws was to disable the church, not provide justice and closure for victims. He doesn't seem to realize their trauma lasts a lifetime. He's more concerned about the institution than the people in it. He also excuses these cases by saying child sex abuse happens in other public places, like public schools, so it's unfair to pick on the church, even though the church claims to have higher moral standards than everyone else, and the church has often gone out of its way to protect priests accused of sexual abuse. Public school teachers accused of the same thing do not get shuffled off to a new school. Donohue also says the real problem is that some abusive priests are gay, not pedophiles. Checkmate? I mean, he wants us to blame homosexuality for the sex abuse scandals, not the power dynamics, or the lack of transparency, or the abstinence requirement for priests, or the problematic culture within the Catholic hierarchy. A couple of years ago, when a grand jury in Pennsylvania famously issued a report listing in graphic detail all of the awful things credibly accused priests had done to children in archdioceses across the state over many decades, Donohue dismissed all of it, in its entirety, because, and I quote, "most of the alleged victims were not children, they were adolescents." Weird flex. Donohue actually published an 11-page rebuttal of the grand jury report that was just bananas. I'll leave a link to it in the description in case you hate yourself and you want to read it, but I'll give you a taste. To the claim that the priests raped their victims, he wrote, "This is an obscene lie. Most of the alleged victims were not raped. They were groped, or otherwise abused, but not penetrated, which is what the word rape means." He's saying sexual abuse isn't really a big deal unless there's penetration. Which, no. In response to the claim that the priests were pedophiles, he said of the victims, "Anyone who actually reads the report knows it's a lie. Most were post-pubescent." So he learned to stop calling them adolescents. Yay. Imagine defending the Catholic Church by saying, "Come on, it's not like the priests abused 5-year-olds. The kids were 15. So relax, everybody. They were tweens, not toddlers. So there, mic drop." When the Me Too movement began, Donohue actually urged Hollywood to follow the lead of the Catholic Church because he said the Catholic Church is really good at dealing with this sort of thing. He wrote, "There is no institution in the nation today, religious or secular, that has a better record in dealing with sexual misconduct than the Catholic Church." That's like congratulating George W. Bush for stopping terrorist attacks starting on September 12th, 2001. Like, you're only doing that because we all know what happened earlier. If they were so good at this, we wouldn't have to congratulate them for doing their job. Just because the church has gone from a failing grade to a D-, it doesn't deserve a victory parade. How nasty is Donohue? He's so nasty that he was depicted in an episode of South Park overthrowing the Pope and taking that title for himself before eventually getting killed by Jesus. I'm pretty sure he liked that episode because he got to be the victim at the end. After all of this, you might wonder what the connection is between the Catholic League and the Catholic Church. The technical answer is there isn't one. The Vatican doesn't oversee the group, it doesn't fund the group, and the group works independently of any church. That said, the Catholic League was once housed in the building for the Archdiocese of New York, and several conservative bishops endorse and personally support their work. The group is also home to many people known more for being conservatives than being religious leaders. For example, its board of directors includes Raymond Arroyo, a journalist who has interviewed Donald Trump a number of times during his presidency for the Catholic channel EWTN, and who has the distinction of never ever making news in the process because he only asks softball questions, never really challenging Trump on anything. Its board of directors also includes the founder of Domino's Pizza, Thomas Monahan, who is a far-right activist. There's also Alan Keyes, the political commentator and guy most famous for losing a 2004 US Senate race to the relatively unknown Barack Obama. By the way, thank you for that, Alan. We owe you one. Then there's Larry Kudlow, the Trump administration economist, who said in February that we don't have to worry about the coronavirus because we've contained it pretty close to airtight. That was like 250,000 COVID deaths ago. My point is, the Catholic League is not sending their best. One more. One of their advisors used to be Dinesh D'Souza, the convicted felon who was pardoned by Trump and now spends his time spreading wildly insane conspiracy theories to the dumbest people you know. But ultimately, no matter who's overseeing the group or advising the group, this is an organization defined by one guy and only one guy, Bill Donohue. Donohue is so valuable to the Catholic League that according to the group's 2017 tax returns, the most recent publicly available tax returns, they have more than $45 million in the bank, mostly in investments. Donohue himself made well over $500,000 that year in salary, while his vice president, whose name you've never even heard before, made well over $250,000. Not bad for a professional internet troll and a VP no one ever sees. It's hard to imagine he's worth it, though. In 2015, a New York Times reporter told the group Americans United for Separation of Church and State that he would never quote Donohue as an expert on anything, and that given his high salary and the organization's assets, it's, quote, striking to me how little impact on policy or the public dialogue the Catholic League has, unquote. The truth is, if other groups treated Catholics the way Billy the Bully treats everybody else, maybe you could legitimately think anti-Catholicism is a problem. But he lives in a fantasy world where everyone is always out to get Catholics and constantly talking about how horrible he is. He doesn't understand that's because he's just utterly unlikable, not because he's Catholic. And that the criticism against the church is usually because it's powerful and harmful, and it has a long history of being both of those things. Seriously, after all this, maybe we should be thanking Bill Donohue. He's doing more to push people away from and out of the Catholic Church than any prominent atheist ever could.